children evicted the couple until they found a mansion hidden in the mountains. 50 years of marriage were not enough to prepare Walter and Dorothy Ann for the moment when their own children knocked on the door with empty suitcases and an ultimatum. The life they had built together in the same house for decades was being shattered by those who should have protected them in their old age. It was on a Tuesday morning that Richard, the eldest son, arrived accompanied by his wife Jennifer and the suitcases. Without beating around the bush, he announced that his parents needed to leave the house immediately because they were no longer capable of taking care of themselves. Dorothy Ann felt her legs tremble as she listened to the cold words from her own flesh and blood. "Dad, Mom, you're forgetting things. Yesterday you left the stove on again," said Richard, pointing to the kitchen as if it were irrefutable proof. Walter, with his 72 years and completely white hair, tried to protest, but his voice came out weak. "Son, it was just once. I was tired after my blood pressure medication." "It's not just once, Dad. Jennifer is right when she says you're becoming a danger to yourselves," interrupted Jennifer, always ready to support her husband in any decision. "We've already spoken with St. Vincent's Senior Home. It's a very nice place. You'll have company your own age." Dorothy Ann, a 69-year-old woman with graying waves she always kept neatly styled, felt her heart race. The word senior home echoed in her mind like a prison sentence. "Jennifer, please. This is our home. We built our life here." Her voice was choked, but she fought to maintain her composure. "Mom, you don't understand. It's not safe anymore. And besides, Richard and I need a bigger place for the kids," Jennifer continued, not hiding her impatience. "It's already decided. The realtor is coming tomorrow to appraise the house." Walter leaned on the living room table, the same table where the family gathered every Sunday for lunch. Now it would be sold along with everything else. "And Michael, does he know about this?" he asked, referring to the youngest son. Michael agreed. "He also thinks it's for the best," lied Richard, knowing his brother wasn't even aware of the plan. The argument lasted for hours, but it was useless. Richard and Jennifer did not listen to the elderly couple's pleas. Dorothy Ann cried, begged, tried to reason, but it was like talking to a wall. Walter, a man of few words his whole life, remained silent, watching the son he raised turn into a stranger. When the sun began to set, Dorothy Ann and Walter found themselves on the doorstep with only 2 suitcases in their hands. 50 years of memories now fit into small luggage. The house where they raised their children, where they celebrated birthdays, where they comforted each other in difficult times, was being taken from them without ceremony. "Where will you stay tonight?" asked Richard, as if it were a minor detail. "In the car," replied Walter curtly without looking at his son. "Dad, be reasonable. Agree to go to the senior home. It's temporary until you get used to it," insisted Richard, but there was something in his voice that didn't sound convincing. Dorothy Ann raised her head with a dignity no one could take from her. "We will never agree to be put somewhere against our will. We'd rather sleep on the street." They were harsh words, but true. Pride was all they had left at that moment. The old blue Toyota Camry, which Walter had driven for 15 years, became their home that first night. They stopped at a gas station on the road leading to Aspen, where there was less traffic and they could go unnoticed. Dorothy Ann couldn't sleep a wink. She stayed awake watching her husband, who tried to get comfortable in the driver's seat. How many times had they traveled in that car to visit their children, always bringing homemade sweets and gifts for the grandchildren? Now they were there, abandoned like old dogs that are no longer useful. Around 3 in the morning, while rummaging through her purse looking for a tissue, Dorothy Ann found a yellowed envelope at the bottom of the side compartment. It was an envelope she hadn't seen in years, with the shaky handwriting of her late mother-in-law, Mrs. Gertrude. "Dear Walter and Dorothy Ann," said the old paper. "If you ever need a place to stay, there is a family property that might serve you. The key is in the 3rd loose stone of the left wall. Maple Street, no number, St. Benedict Springs. Go up the mountain to the end of the dirt road. With love, Gertrude." Dorothy Ann woke Walter by shaking him gently. "Walter, look at this. Your mother left an address." He rubbed his tired eyes and read the paper in the dim light of the gas station. "My mother never mentioned any property," he murmured, confused. But it's written right here, look, in her handwriting. Walter hesitated. Memories of his mother were complicated. Mrs. Gertrude had always been a difficult, critical woman, especially with Dorothy Ann. When she passed away 5 years ago, they didn't even know a family property existed. Dorothy Ann, what if it's a trick? My mother never really liked us much, he said, but his voice revealed more hurt than certainty. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. Walter, we have nowhere to go. What do we have to lose by going to take a look? Argued Dorothy Ann, with the wisdom of someone who had nothing left to lose. When the sun rose, they set off towards St. Benedict Springs. The road wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains, passing landscapes that in other times would have enchanted them. Now, everything seemed grey, even with the blue sky. St. Benedict Springs was a small, cozy town full of rustic inns and restaurants. They stopped at a little market to ask for directions to Maple Street. "Oh, you're looking for Mrs. Gertrude's house?" asked the owner, a short man with a greying moustache. "It's been a long time since anyone's been up there. The road is pretty steep, you know. Are you sure you can make it up with that car?" Dorothy Ann's heart raced. The house really did exist. The dirt road was steep and full of curves, just as the shopkeeper had warned. The Toyota Camry groaned and creaked climbing the mountain, but it bravely held on. After 20 minutes of climbing, they reached the end of the path. Before them stood a structure that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. A stone house with thick walls and a solid wooden door, partially hidden by vegetation that had grown untended in recent years. The structure was solid, though it needed repairs. "Good heavens," whispered Dorothy Ann. "Walter, look at this." They got out of the car in silence, still processing the sight. The house was there, real, exactly where the letter said it would be. Walter walked to the left wall and began examining the stones. On the third try, one of them moved, revealing a small space where an old rusty key was hidden. "She wasn't joking," he said, almost in disbelief. The key turned in the lock with some resistance, but the door opened, revealing the interior of the house. The smell of dampness and dust filled their nostrils, but there was something welcoming about the place. All the furniture was covered with dusty white sheets. Dorothy Ann walked through the main room, observing every detail. The stone walls were thick and solid, keeping the space cool even with the heat outside. "Walter, come see this," she called from the kitchen. It was a spacious kitchen, with a wood-burning stove and a large solid wood table. On the wall, there were framed photographs that made them freeze. They were family photos, photos they thought had been lost for years. Walter in his youth, in uniform, when he served in the army. Dorothy Ann pregnant with Richard. The little boys playing in the backyard. The wedding photo they searched for everywhere after a flood. "How did these pictures end up here?" asked Dorothy Ann, touching a frame delicately. But there was something more disturbing. In many of the photographs, the grandchildren, Brandon and Emily, already grown up, appeared hugging Mrs. Gertrude. Recent photos taken in the last few years. "Walter, look at this one. It's Brandon at 15. I remember that outfit. And here is Emily at her high school graduation." Walter observed the images with growing confusion. His mother had been meeting with the grandchildren regularly, but they never knew about it. Why did Richard and Jennifer hide these visits? A noise on the porch startled them. Heavy footsteps approached the door. Dorothy Ann instinctively hid behind her husband, who grabbed a broom handle for protection. "Who's in there?" shouted a rough male voice. The door opened and in walked a man of about 60, with dark hair and muscular build, wearing work clothes stained with dirt. "I'm Harold, neighbor from the property down below, came to see who was messing with Mrs. Gertrude's things." Walter introduced himself as the deceased son, but Harold looked at him with suspicion. "Funny. I know Mrs. Gertrude's son well. Comes here all the time with his family. Must be about 40, dark hair," said Harold, clearly referring to Richard. "I'm the other son," clarified Walter. "Richard is my son, not my brother." Harold's expression changed completely. He looked visibly embarrassed. "Wow, sorry. I didn't know Mrs. Gertrude had another son. Richard always said she was just his grandmother, never mentioned you all." Dorothy Ann felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. For years, Richard had been visiting his grandmother in secret, presenting himself as if he were an only child. "How often did they come here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Every month, sometimes more. Mrs. Gertrude was always talking about the grandchildren, showed new pictures every time. She adored them," explained Harold, not realizing the bombshell he was dropping. "In fact, they were here just last month, even after she passed, came to get some papers." Walter sat down heavily in an old chair. His mother had maintained a close relationship with the grandchildren for years, while they believed the family was distant. And more seriously, Richard had returned to the house after his grandmother's passing to retrieve documents without telling his parents. "Harold, do you know what they came to get here?" asked Dorothy Ann. "Oh, Richard said it was to see if there were any important inheritance documents. Took some papers, some boxes," replied the neighbor. "But look, if you're family, you have every right to stay here. The house is big, has 4 bedrooms upstairs." After Harold left, the couple remained silent for a long time. The revelations were too much to process at once. Not only had they discovered they had a place to stay, but also that they had been systematically excluded from the relationship between Richard and his grandmother. "Why did he do this to us, Walter?" asked Dorothy Ann, finally letting the tears fall. "I don't know, Dorothy. I don't understand anything anymore," he replied, stroking his wife's graying hair. Night fell, and they decided to stay. They had no choice, really. They found bedding in a closet and improvised accommodations in the main bedroom. The house was very quiet, only the sound of the wind in the trees and some nocturnal animal in the distance. During the night, Dorothy Ann explored other rooms. In the study, she found more surprises. An old desk was filled with letters from Richard to his grandmother, dated from the last 5 years. "Dear Grandma Gertrude," one of them said, "thank you so much for the money you sent for Brandon to study English. We didn't tell my parents because they would be upset to have been forgotten. You are right. It's better to keep it a secret for now." Dorothy Ann read letter after letter, each more painful than the last. Mrs. Gertrude had been helping her grandchildren financially for years, always asking for discretion. Richard justified the secrecy by saying it was to avoid hurting his parents, but it was clear he wanted to keep the relationship exclusive. In a more recent letter, Richard wrote about financial difficulties at the company. He mentioned he was considering selling his parents' house and using the money to cover debts. Mrs. Gertrude responded, saying she didn't approve of the idea and suggested that Richard talk honestly with his parents about the problems. The last letter in the pile was a response from Mrs. Gertrude, dated just a few months before her passing. In it, the elderly woman expressed concern about her grandson's intentions and made it clear she would never approve any plan to harm Walter and Dorothy Ann. "My dear grandson," she wrote in a shaky hand, "if anything happens to me, I want you to know that this house and everything I have belongs to your father, my son Walter. He is a good man who deserves to have a safe place to grow old with dignity. I will not allow him to be disrespected." Dorothy Ann woke Walter and showed him the letters. He read in silence, his expression growing graver by the moment. "Our own mother tried to protect us, Dorothy, and we didn't even know," he said, his voice choked. "Walter, do you think Richard knew about these letters when he decided to throw us out?" "I think so. That's why he came looking for the papers here after the funeral. He knew the inheritance was ours." The next morning brought more revelations. A man in a suit arrived at the house looking for them. It was attorney Robert Williamson, the lawyer responsible for Mrs. Gertrude's will. "Mr. Walter, I've been looking for you for months," he said, obviously relieved. "Your mother left everything in order, but I couldn't locate you. The address I had was the house that's now for sale." Dr. Robert explained that Mrs. Gertrude had left not only the Mountain House, but also a considerable savings account and some financial investments. The total value of the inheritance was enough to ensure a comfortable old age for the couple. "But there's something strange," the lawyer continued. "Your son Richard came to my office several times questioning the will. He insisted there was a mistake, that his grandmother had promised to leave part of the inheritance to her grandchildren." Walter and Dorothy Ann exchanged meaningful looks. "Doctor, what exactly did my mother write about my son in the will?" Dr. Robert opened his briefcase and read a specific passage. "I leave all my inheritance to my son Walter, as I believe he will know how to use it wisely. As for my grandson Richard, I hope that one day he learns that money cannot buy what truly matters in life." The sentence was like a stab to the heart. Mrs. Gertrude had perceived something in Richard's character that they themselves had refused to see for years. "There's one more thing," said the lawyer hesitantly. "Your mother left instructions that, should you be mistreated by the family, I was to investigate the circumstances. She was afraid something like that might happen." Doctor. Robert handed over a sealed envelope with their names written by hand. "My dear Walter and Dorothy Ann," began Mrs. Gertrude's final letter. "If you are reading this letter, it means my fears have come true. I know we didn't have the best relationship in life, and I regret that every day. The truth is, I always admired you, but my pride kept me from showing it. You built a family with love and dedication, even when I made things difficult. Now, at my age, I realize that a person's worth isn't in what they have, but in what they give. You gave everything for your children, and I hope that legacy protects you when you need protection. The house in the mountains was my refuge for years. It's a place of peace where you can find the tranquility you deserve. Don't let anyone take you away from there. It is your home by right and by love. With affection and a request for forgiveness, Gertrude." Dorothy Ann cried, reading the letter. All the resentment she had held for years toward her mother-in-law dissolved in that moment. The woman she thought despised her, in fact respected her, and wanted to protect her. The following days were an adjustment to the new reality. They cleaned the house, discovering treasures in every room. Books, old records, family heirlooms they thought were lost forever. Mrs. Gertrude had carefully preserved the family's history. Harold became a helpful neighbor, assisting with small repairs and bringing fresh produce from his garden. He shared more details about Richard's visits, always emphasizing how the young man seemed anxious and nervous the last few times he appeared. "You know, I thought it was strange when he came here right after the funeral," commented Harold. "Mrs. Gertrude always said you were the most important people in her life, but he acts like he's the only heir." A week after settling into the house, they received an unexpected visit. It was Michael, the youngest son, who appeared alone and visibly upset. "Dad, Mum, thank God I found you," he said, hugging them both tightly. "I only found out yesterday what Richard did. I can't believe he kicked you out of the house." Michael was different from his older brother. He had always been the more sensitive son, the one who called every Sunday and asked if they needed anything. He worked as a teacher at a public school, and despite not having much money, always showed genuine affection for his parents. "Michael, your brother said you agreed with everything," said Dorothy Ann, still hurt. "I didn't know anything, Mum. I was traveling with the school, taking the students on a field trip. When I got back, Susan told me you had left the house. I went looking for Richard, and he said you had decided to go to a senior home." "And you believed him?" "At first, yes, because it's Richard. He's always been the responsible brother, the one who handles the family's practical matters." Michael paused, embarrassed. "But Susan got suspicious and insisted I check the senior home. When I found out you weren't there, I confronted Richard." Michael recounted having a violent argument with his older brother. Richard finally admitted he had kicked out his parents because he needed to sell the house to cover company debts. "Dad, he lost a lot of money gambling. The company almost went bankrupt last year, and he used client money to cover the holes. Now he's being sued and needs money urgently." The confession was like a bucket of cold water. Walter had always been proud of Richard, the successful son who ran his own company. Discovering he was involved with gambling and legal troubles was devastating. "And Jennifer, does she know about this?" asked Dorothy Ann. "Of course she knows. In fact, she's the one who came up with the plan. She said you were old anyway, that you wouldn't miss the house if you had a decent place to stay." Dorothy Ann clenched her fists. For years, she had tried to have a good relationship with her daughter-in-law, ignoring the signs that Jennifer saw her in-laws as a burden. "Michael, do they know where we are?" "No, but they're looking. Richard is desperate because he can't sell the house without your signatures. It seems there's some pending legal issue." Attorney Robert Williamson had mentioned something about that. Since the house had been in Walter and Dorothy Ann's name for decades, Richard couldn't sell it without authorization. He had counted on psychological pressure to force them to agree. "And now, what are we going to do?" asked Walter. "I don't know, Dad. All I know is I won't let them hurt you again." Michael stayed for dinner, helping to finish arranging some furniture. It was comforting to have at least one of their children by their side. During the meal, he shared more details about Richard's financial situation. "Dad, he owes the bank almost $200,000, and there are other creditors too. The company is practically bankrupt. He's just keeping up appearances." "200,000, repeated Walter, incredulous. "How did he get into this situation?" "Online gambling, Dad. It started small, but turned into an addiction. Jennifer tried to control it for a while, but then she started encouraging it because she believed he would win it all back." The irony of the situation was not lost on Dorothy Ann. Richard had kicked them out, claiming they couldn't take care of themselves, when in fact he was the one who had lost control of his own life. The next morning, Michael said goodbye, promising to return on the weekend with Susan and the kids. It was the first time in months that Dorothy Ann felt truly happy, knowing that at least one of their children still loved them. 2 days later, the peace was disturbed by a car coming up the dirt road. Dorothy Ann recognized the sound of the engine before she even saw the vehicle. It was Richard's pickup truck. He got out of the car, accompanied by Jennifer, both with tense, determined expressions. Her beautiful daughter-in-law's face was marked by irritation, her perfectly styled blonde hair contrasting with the rustic, rural setting. "Dad, Mom, what's this all about?" said Richard, still trying to maintain a tone of authority. "You can't just disappear like this." "Disappear?" repeated Dorothy Ann, feeling the anger rise in her chest. "We were thrown out of our home, Richard. Have you forgotten?" "You weren't thrown out. It was a sensible decision for your safety," Jennifer interjected, with that condescending tone that always irritated Dorothy Ann. Walter slowly rose from the chair where he was reading the newspaper. His movements were deliberate, controlled, like a man preparing for battle. "Richard, enough with the lies. We know the truth. We know about the debts, the gambling, everything." Richard's face paled. Jennifer looked at her husband with a poorly disguised expression of panic. "Who told you these lies?" "Was it Michael?" retorted Richard, trying to deflect. "It doesn't matter who told us," said Dorothy Ann, feeling a strength she hadn't experienced in years. "What matters is that it's true. You threw us out of our home to sell our property and pay off your gambling debts." "Look, that's not the point right now," said Jennifer, trying to take control of the conversation. "The important thing is that you come back home and sign the sale papers. The realtor already has an interested buyer." Dorothy Ann laughed, a bitter laugh that echoed through the stone house. "Sign the papers? After what you did to us?" "Mom, be reasonable. You don't really need the house now that you have this place," argued Richard, looking around with disdain. "And we really need that money." "Need it for what, to gamble more?" asked Walter, his voice low but laden with disappointment. "Dad, things are tough. Everyone goes through financial difficulties sometimes," Richard tried to justify. "Tough is being thrown out of your home by your own children," retorted Dorothy Ann. The argument went on for over an hour, with Richard and Jennifer alternating between veiled threats and emotional appeals. They promised the parents could move back into the house after the sale as tenants. They offered to pay an allowance. They swore it was temporary. "You want us to sign over our house to you and then live there as charity cases?" asked Walter, incredulous. "It's not charity, Dad. It's a family arrangement," insisted Richard. "A family arrangement is kicking your parents out of their home." Dorothy Ann was losing her patience. Jennifer, realizing the diplomatic strategy wasn't working, revealed her true nature. "Look, you're old and you'll be gone soon. What do you need a big house for? We have children to raise, a future ahead of us." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's words hung in the air like a slap. Even Richard seemed embarrassed by his wife's brutality. "Jennifer," said Dorothy Ann, rising slowly, "I raised this man you call your husband. I washed his diapers, nursed his fevers, taught him to walk and talk. Never, not for a single moment, did it cross my mind that he would grow up to marry someone who would wish for my departure." "I didn't say I wish for your departure," Jennifer tried to backtrack, realizing she had gone too far. "I said, you'll be gone soon. It's the same thing." Richard finally spoke, his voice tense. "Mom, Jennifer didn't mean it like that. She's stressed about the whole situation." "No, Richard," interrupted Walter. "She meant exactly what she said. And you agreed, otherwise you wouldn't have kicked us out of our home." The conversation took an even more painful turn when Richard began listing his parents' supposed behavioral problems. He claimed Dorothy Ann was becoming forgetful, that Walter no longer drove well, that they were a danger to themselves. "Richard, yesterday I drove into town, did the shopping, talked to the pharmacist about my medication, and came home without any problem," said Walter calmly. "The only danger in my life is children who lie and steal." "I didn't steal anything." "Kicking your parents out to sell their house isn't theft?" The accusation hit Richard squarely. He knew that morally he had crossed an irreversible line. "Dad, I'll pay the money back, it's just a loan." "With what money will you pay it back? Your business is bankrupt, you have huge debts, and you still want to gamble more to try and recover?" asked Dorothy Ann. Richard had no answer. Jennifer tried one last card. "Fine, if you don't want to sell the house, what about a loan? You could use the house as collateral and lend us the money." The suggestion was so absurd, Walter almost laughed. "Lend money to the people who kicked us out? Jennifer, do you think we've completely lost our minds?" After hours of fruitless argument, Richard and Jennifer left empty-handed. But before leaving, Richard made a veiled threat. "Mom, Dad, you'll have to sign these papers sooner or later. The situation is more serious than you think." After they left, Dorothy Ann and Walter sat in silence for a long time. The confrontation had been draining, but also clarifying. Now they knew exactly where everyone in the family stood. "Walter, do you think we did something wrong in raising him?" asked Dorothy Ann, a doubt that tormented her. "Dorothy, we raised Richard the same way we raised Michael. The difference lies in them, not in us." It was a simple but true answer. The same love, the same values, the same upbringing had produced two completely different men. The following week, they dedicated themselves to exploring the property and the region better. They discovered the house wasn't just beautiful, but also valuable. An architect visiting the region confirmed it was a historical 19th century building, exceptionally preserved. "This house is worth a fortune," said the professional. "It's a rare example of colonial New York architecture. If it were designated a historical landmark, it would be even more valuable." The information brought a new perspective to Dorothy Ann and Walter. They weren't just inheritors of an old house, but owners of a significant cultural heritage. Harold also brought interesting information. He mentioned that the city council had a project to develop rural tourism in the region, which would further increase the value of historic properties. "You're sitting on a gold mine," he said, admiring the stone facade of the house. "If you wanted, you could turn this into a bed and breakfast and do very well." The idea was tempting, but Dorothy Ann and Walter had neither the energy nor the interest in running a business. They wanted only peace, dignity, and a place to call home. During a rainy afternoon, while exploring the attic, they found more evidence of Richard's secret visits. A box hidden behind old beams contained documents Mrs. Gertrude had kept, birth certificates, old deeds, and also correspondence from Richard asking to borrow money. In a letter dated 2 years ago, Richard asked his grandmother for a considerable sum to cover emergency company expenses. Mrs. Gertrude replied agreeing, but imposing one condition, that he stop gambling and seek professional help. Richard's next letter promised he had stopped gambling and was seeking treatment, but other correspondence revealed the promises didn't last long. He continued asking for money, always with new excuses. The final exchange of letters was particularly revealing. Mrs. Gertrude refused to give more money and threatened to tell everything to Walter and Dorothy Ann. Richard responded, pleading for her to keep the secret, promising to fix everything himself. "Look at this, Walter," said Dorothy Ann, reading a letter aloud. "Grandma, if my parents find out, they'll be disappointed in me. I know I messed up, but I can fix everything. I just need a little more time." And her reply, "Richard, you've exhausted my patience and my money. If you can't sort out your life, you'll have to face the consequences. I won't protect you forever," Walter finished. The letters painted a clear picture. Mrs. Gertrude had realized her grandson had a serious addiction and tried to help him, but finally lost patience. That's why she had redirected her entire inheritance to Walter and Dorothy Ann. That night, they received an unexpected call. It was attorney Robert Williamson, the lawyer, with worrying news. Mr. Walter, I received a call from another lawyer today. It seems your son is contesting Mrs. Gertrude's will. Can he do that? Technically, yes, but it's very difficult to prove she wasn't of sound mind. I myself can testify that Mrs. Gertrude was very lucid until the end. What does this mean for us? It means the inheritance process could get complicated. I recommend you hire a lawyer specialized in probate law. The news brought a new source of stress. Richard had not only thrown them out of their home, but was now also trying to steal his grandmother's inheritance. "Doctor, do they have any chance of getting anything?" asked Dorothy Ann. "Honestly, very little. The will is well drafted, witnessed, and registered, but lawsuits are costly and time-consuming, even when they lack merit." After hanging up, the couple talked late into the night. The situation was becoming increasingly complex and painful. "Dorothy Ann, sometimes I think maybe we should just give him the money and be done with it," said Walter, tired of the situation. "Walter, if we give him the money now, he'll gamble it all away and come back asking for more. We won't solve his problem. We'll enable it. But he's our son, Dorothy Ann." "Exactly. He's our son, and that's why we can't help him destroy himself." It was a difficult but necessary conversation. They were learning that loving a child sometimes meant saying no even when it hurts. The next day they received a visit from Susan, Michael's wife, who showed up with the grandchildren. It was comforting to have the house full of life and joy again. The children ran through the rooms, explored the attic, and played in the spacious backyard. "Grandma, what a beautiful house," said Martha, the 12-year-old granddaughter. "It's like a castle." "Grandpa, can you build a treehouse for us?" asked Tyler, the 10-year-old grandson. Walter smiled. It had been years since he felt needed for anything beyond signing papers or giving money. The prospect of building a treehouse excited him more than he imagined. Susan, always practical and direct, brought news about Richard and Jennifer. "Aunt Dorothy Ann, they are desperate. Jennifer even tried to convince me to talk to you about selling the house." "And what did you say?" "That after what they did, you had every right not to help." Susan also shared that there were family rumors about Richard's financial situation. Cousins and uncles were commenting that he had borrowed money from several people. "Michael is worried that Richard might do something foolish," she said, lowering her voice so the children wouldn't hear. "What kind of foolish thing?" "He talked about disappearing, moving to another city to escape his creditors. Jennifer is terrified at the possibility of losing their standard of living. The idea of Richard running from his responsibilities was more painful for Dorothy Ann than all the other problems. She had raised a son who, in the face of difficulties, thought about abandoning everything instead of facing the consequences of his actions. During lunch, the children asked innocent questions about why their grandparents no longer lived in the old house. Walter and Dorothy Ann tried to explain simply, without vilifying their uncle. "Grandpa, is Uncle Richard mean?" asked Tyler, with the typical frankness of children. "No, my boy. Uncle Richard has problems and made bad decisions, but he's not mean," replied Walter, surprising even Dorothy Ann with his diplomacy. "Will you be friends with him again?" "I hope so one day. Family is important, even when there are disagreements." In the afternoon, while Walter began planning the treehouse, Dorothy Ann spoke privately with Susan about the family situation. "Susan, do you think there's hope for Richard to change?" "Aunt, honestly, I think it's hard while he's with Jennifer. She doesn't want him to change. She wants him to find a magical solution to keep living as before. What if he lost everything? Do you think that would make him reconsider?" "Maybe, but it could also destroy him completely. Addiction is a complicated disease." The conversation was interrupted by Michael, who arrived straight from work. He wore a worried expression he didn't try to hide. "Dad, Mum, I have news about Richard." Everyone gathered in the main room while the children played outside. "He went to the bank today. He tried to use the house as collateral for a loan, claiming he was responsible for his elderly parents," Michael recounted. "And did he succeed?" "No. The manager called to confirm with you, and since he couldn't reach anyone at the house, he suspended the transaction. But Richard might try other banks." The situation was getting out of control. Richard had not only evicted them and contested the inheritance, but was now trying to use the house as collateral without authorization. "Michael, isn't that forgery?" asked Dorothy Ann. "I think so. He might be getting into a very complicated legal situation." Attorney Robert Williamson confirmed the severity of the situation when they called him. Richard was on a path that could lead him to much bigger problems than gambling debts. "I recommend you file a police report," said the attorney. "It's important to document these attempted frauds." "But he is our son," protested Walter. "Mr. Walter, precisely because he is your son, he needs to learn that actions have consequences. If you continue down this path, you could end up facing very serious problems." It was an agonizing decision. Reporting their own son felt like a betrayal of everything they had built as a family. But allowing him to continue committing fraud was not an option either. "Attorney Robert, what if we talked to him one more time, made it clear we know about the fraud attempts and asked him to stop? You can try, but document everything. Record the conversation if possible. It could be important later." After Michael and the family left, Dorothy Ann and Walter spent the night talking about the situation. It was hard to accept they had raised a son capable of trying to steal from his own parents. "Walter, where did we go wrong?" asked Dorothy Ann for the umpteenth time. "Dorothy, let's stop blaming ourselves. We raised two sons the same way. One turned out right, the other didn't. We can't control the choices they make as adults. It was a painful but necessary lesson. They had done the best they could as parents. Richard's decisions were his responsibility, not theirs." The next morning, they decided to call Richard and schedule a final conversation. They wanted to make it clear they knew about all the fraud attempts and give him one last chance to reconsider his actions. The phone rang several times before Richard answered. His voice sounded tense and tired. "Hi, Dad. Richard, we need to talk. Can you come here today?" "About what?" "About your attempt to use our house as collateral without authorization." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Richard knew he had been found out. "Dad, I can explain." "Then come explain in person." Richard hesitated before answering. "Okay, I'll come over this afternoon." The wait was agonizing. Dorothy Ann cooked compulsively, preparing enough food for a small army. It was her way of dealing with anxiety. Walter stayed in the backyard, pretending to work in the garden, but really just trying to organize his thoughts. How should a father talk to a son who was becoming a dangerous stranger? Richard arrived alone without Jennifer. He looked thinner and had deep, dark circles. His clothes, always impeccable, were wrinkled. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Mom," he said, avoiding looking directly at them. "Sit down, Richard. Let's talk," said Walter, pointing to a chair on the porch. What followed was the most difficult conversation of their lives. Richard initially tried to deny, then downplay, and finally justify his actions. He claimed desperation, pressure from creditors, fear of losing everything. "Son, you've already lost everything," said Dorothy Ann calmly. "You've lost our trust, our respect, our willingness to help, and now you're risking losing your freedom too." "Mom, I'm not a criminal. I'm just a desperate man trying to save my family." "Richard, attempting to forge documents is a crime." "Yes," Walter interjected. "And trying to evict your own parents from their home to sell their property is, at the very least, elder abuse." The accusation hit Richard like a slap. He had never thought of his actions in those legal terms. "Dad, you're not going to report me, are you? I'm your son." "Precisely because you're our son is why we're considering doing it," replied Dorothy Ann. "If we let you continue down this path, soon you'll be in a real jail cell." The conversation lasted for hours. Richard cried, humbled himself, promised to change, begged for forgiveness. But there was something performative in his words, as if he were playing the part of the repentant son. "Richard, what exactly do you want from us?" asked Walter. "I want forgiveness. I want us to be a family again." "And our house? Do you still want us to sell it to pay your debts?" Richard hesitated. The honest answer would be yes, but he realized he couldn't say that at that moment. "No, Dad. You're right. The house is yours. And your grandmother's inheritance. Are you going to keep contesting it?" I'll think about it. The answer revealed that Richard hadn't completely given up on his plans yet. He was just temporarily retreating. "Richard, I'm going to be very clear," said Walter. "If you try any more fraud involving our assets, we will file a police report. If you keep contesting the inheritance without grounds, we will sue for emotional damages. And if you try to pressure or threaten us in any way, we will request a protective order." The words came out firm, determined. Richard had never seen his father speak with such authority. "Dad, you wouldn't do that to me. We don't want to, son, but we will if necessary." When Richard left, Dorothy Ann broke down in tears. The conversation had been necessary but extremely painful. "Walter, do you think we can save our son?" "I don't know, Dorothy. But we managed to save ourselves, and that's something." The following days were calmer. Richard made no further attempts at contact, which brought temporary relief. They dedicated themselves to improving the house and exploring the region. They discovered that St. Benedict Springs had a welcoming community of mature people. There were hiking groups, book clubs, cultural activities. For the first time in years, Dorothy Ann felt part of something bigger than family problems. Walter found purpose helping Harold with small repairs on the neighboring property. The physical work and the feeling of being useful were good for his self-esteem. "Dorothy, you know something. I think I'm happier here than I was in our old house," he said one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. "I think so too. Back there we lived worried about the children's problems, trying to help, trying to fix things. Here we have our own life." It was a profound reflection. For decades, they had lived for the family, always available to solve problems and give support. Now, forced by circumstance, they were rediscovering who they were as a couple. The peace was temporarily broken 2 weeks later when they received a visit from a court officer. Richard had officially contested Mrs. Gertrude's will, alleging she suffered from dementia when she wrote it. "It's a long and costly process," explained attorney Robert Williamson when they called him. "Richard will have to prove his grandmother lacked mental capacity. It's practically impossible, but it can drag on for months. And in the meantime, can we not use the inheritance? Technically you can, but I recommend caution. If there's significant financial movement, the judge could freeze the accounts." The situation created a new source of stress. They had money to live comfortably, but were legally prevented from using it freely. "Walter, he's punishing us," said Dorothy Ann. "Even knowing he'll lose, he's forcing us to spend money on lawyers and live in uncertainty." It was true. Richard had found a way to torment them even from a distance. Michael was furious when he learned of the situation. He went to confront his brother personally, resulting in an argument that almost ended in a physical fight. Michael came home with scratches on his face, Susan said during a visit. He said Richard is completely out of his mind. Did they really fight? Michael tried to get Richard to drop the lawsuit. In response, Richard said he was going to make his parents suffer until they gave him what was rightfully his. The phrase revealed that Richard not only wanted money but also revenge. He felt betrayed by his parents and was determined to punish them. "And Jennifer? How is she reacting?" "She's fully supportive. In fact, I think she's the one encouraging it. She told Michael that you are selfish and that an inheritance should be divided among the children." The information did not surprise Dorothy Ann. Jennifer had always shown poorly disguised greed. Now, with the financial difficulties, her true nature was being revealed. During this difficult period, they found comfort in the simple routine of rural life. Dorothy Ann cultivated a small vegetable garden, discovering pleasure in activities she had never tried before. Walter built the treehouse promised to the grandchildren, a project that kept him busy and proud for weeks. The mountain house was truly becoming a home. Each room gained its own personality, decorated with objects they found in the attic mixed with pieces they bought in town. Harold became more than a neighbor. He was almost a brother. His constant presence and willingness to help compensated in part for the absence of their troubled children. "You know this house is special, right?" he said during a lunch on the porch. "Mrs. Gertrude always said it had a different energy, that the people who lived here found peace." Dorothy Ann smiled. Peace had indeed come to them despite all the adversities. Harold, do you think we did the right thing by not giving in to Richard's pressures? Mrs. Dorothy, you did more than right. You did what was necessary. Sometimes, to save someone, you have to let that person hit rock bottom. It was a simple but profound wisdom. Perhaps by refusing to feed Richard's addiction, they were truly trying to save him. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out now continuing. 3 months after the move to the mountains, they received an unexpected visit. It was Martha, Mrs. Gertrude's former housekeeper, a kind lady of about 50 who had worked for the family for decades. "Mrs. Dorothy, I heard you were here and I came to bring something," she said, carrying a small wooden box. Martha had kept some of Mrs. Gertrude's belongings that she didn't know where to deliver. Among the items was a diary written in the elderly woman's final years. She wrote every day. She always said that one day someone would want to know the truth about the family, explained Martha. The diary revealed surprising aspects of Mrs. Gertrude's personality. Its pages showed an intelligent and observant woman who had noticed Richard's problems long before anyone else. Entry from March 15, 2023. Richard came today asking for more money. He made up a story about problems at the company. But I know it's gambling. I found a paper with a betting site in the pocket of the coat he forgot here. Entry from April 22, 2023. Jennifer called pressuring about the will. She wants to know how much I'm leaving for the grandchildren. She said Walter and Dorothy don't need an inheritance because they already have their own house, as if a house were food that runs out. Entry from June 10, 2023. I found out Richard is bad-mouthing his parents to the children. Brandon asked me if it's true that his grandfather is losing his marbles. I was outraged. Walter is the most clear-headed man I know. The entries continued, painting an increasingly clear picture of Richard's manipulation. Mrs. Gertrude had documented not only the visits and requests for money, but also the lies he told about his parents. Entry from September 2, 2023. Richard suggested I should convince Walter and Dorothy to give me power of attorney to manage their assets. He said they are getting old and might do something foolish with the money. The cynicism of this boy knows no bounds. Good heavens, sighed Dorothy Ann upon reading that passage. He was already planning to control us over a year ago. The last diary entry was particularly touching. Entry from December 15, 2023. I am changing my will tomorrow. All the money and the mountain house go to Walter and Dorothy Ann. They deserve to have a dignified end of life away from their grandson's manipulations. If they ever need proof about Richard's character, this diary will be enough. Martha knows where it is kept. Mrs. Gertrude knew this would happen, said Martha. In the last few months, she was constantly worried about you. She said Richard was preparing something bad. The diary was more than a personal document. It was valuable evidence for the lawsuit. Attorney Robert Williamson was thrilled when he learned of the discovery. With this diary, Richard's lawsuit completely loses its purpose, he explained. It not only proves that Mrs. Gertrude was lucid, but it documents exactly why she changed the will. The news brought immense relief to the couple. They finally had a weapon to defend themselves against Richard's unfounded accusations. Attorney, can we now sue for emotional damages? Asked Dorothy Ann. Not only can you, but you should. Richard caused unnecessary suffering based on lies. The diary proves he knew perfectly well that his grandmother was lucid. The lawsuit took a completely different turn with the presentation of the diary. Richard's lawyer tried to question its authenticity, but a handwriting analysis confirmed it was genuine. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Richard found himself in an untenable position. Not only was he going to lose the lawsuit, but he could also be sued for bad faith litigation. That's when he showed up at the mountain house, this time alone and visibly defeated. He no longer had the arrogant posture of his previous visits. He seemed like a broken man. Dad, Mum, I need to talk to you, he said, his voice choked. Dorothy Ann watched her son with a mixture of sadness and compassion. Despite everything that had happened, it still hurt to see him suffering. Sit down, Richard, we'll listen. What followed was the most honest confession he had made in years. Richard admitted to the gambling addiction, the lies, the manipulation. He told them about the pressure from creditors, the fear of losing everything, the desperation that led him to make terrible decisions. "Dad, I can't sleep anymore. Every night I think about what I did to you. I don't recognize myself anymore," he said, the tears finally falling. "Richard, what do you want from us now?" asked Walter. "Forgiveness, just forgiveness. I don't expect you to help me financially. I don't expect you to trust me again. I just want you to know that I regret everything." Dorothy Ann looked at her son, her first baby, the boy she rocked in her arms during feverish nights, the young man she taught to drive, the man who walked her down the aisle on her wedding day. Where had that man gotten lost along the way? "Richard, are you remorseful or are you desperate?" she asked. The question was direct, without beating around the bush. Richard thought for a long moment before answering. "Both, Mom. I'm desperate because I've lost everything. And remorseful because I realized I lost the most important thing, family." "And Jennifer? Is she remorseful too?" Richard hesitated. The truth was that Jennifer had pressured him to try one last card with his parents, but he didn't want to expose his wife. "Jennifer, she's scared. She doesn't know how she'll raise the kids if we lose everything." "And you? Do you know what you're going to do?" "I don't know, Dad. I'm lost." The conversation lasted the entire afternoon. Richard told details he had hidden for years. The innocent start with sports betting, the escalation to online gambling, the first lies to hide losses, the vicious cycle of betting more to recover what he had lost. "When I realized it, I already owed more than $200,000, and he confessed. And then I thought if I sold your house, I could pay everything off and start from scratch." "And you thought we would agree?" "No. That's why I made up the story that you weren't fit to live on your own. I thought if they got worried enough, they'd end up accepting. The honesty was brutal but necessary. Finally, Richard was admitting the full truth. "And now?" "What are you going to do?" asked Dorothy Ann. "I'm going to turn myself over to the creditors, declare bankruptcy if necessary, seek help for the addiction, try to rebuild my life from scratch." "And your family?" "I don't know if I'll be able to keep the family together. Jennifer, she didn't get married to be poor. It was a painful admission." Richard was acknowledging that he might lose not just his assets, but also his wife. "Richard, do you want a chance to start over?" asked Walter unexpectedly. "What do you mean, Dad?" "There's a small house on the property, the old caretaker's house. It's been abandoned for years, but it can be renovated. If you want to work to rebuild your life, you can stay there." Dorothy Ann looked at her husband surprised. They hadn't discussed this possibility. "But there are conditions," Walter continued. "First, you seek treatment for the addiction immediately. Second, you accept any honest work that comes up, even if it's very different from what you're used to. Third, you won't borrow money from us for at least 2 years. And fourth," added Dorothy Ann, "you become our real son again. No lies, manipulations, or hidden agendas." Richard was silent for a long moment, processing the unexpected offer. "You would do that for me, after everything?" "We'll do it for us," replied Dorothy Ann, "because we want our son back, not this stranger you've become." "And Jennifer, can she come too?" Walter and Dorothy Ann exchanged looks. It was the hardest question. "Richard, Jennifer can come if she accepts the same conditions as you, but make it clear. It won't be the life she's used to. It will be a simple life of work and new beginnings." "I understand." Phil talked to her. When Richard left that afternoon, there was a different atmosphere in the air. It wasn't complete relief nor full happiness, but a possibility of reconciliation. "Walter, do you think we did the right thing by offering the caretaker's house?" asked Dorothy Ann. "I don't know if we did right or wrong. I know we did what our hearts told us to. And if he can't meet the conditions, then at least we'll know we tried. And he'll know too." 3 days later, Richard returned, but alone. His expression was that of someone who had cried a lot recently. "Jennifer doesn't want to come," he said bluntly. "She said she'd rather get divorced than live like poor people in the countryside." The news didn't completely surprise Dorothy Ann and Walter, but it still hurt to see their son suffering. "And the children?" "For now, they'll stay with her." She said, When I get back on my feet financially, we can talk about visitation. It was cruel, but perhaps it was what Richard needed to really change. As long as he had the comfortable life as an escape, he would never feel truly motivated to face his problems. "Richard, are you sure you want to try to start over here?" "I am, Dad. I have nothing left to lose anyway." In the following days, Richard moved into the small caretaker's house. It was a simple two-bedroom structure that needed a lot of repairs. He dedicated himself to the work with an energy his parents hadn't seen in years. "It's strange to see him working with his hands," commented Dorothy Ann, watching Richard fix a door. It had been years since he only worked behind a desk. The physical work seemed to do Richard good. He lost weight, gained muscle, and most importantly, seemed calmer. The nights out in the city, the expensive dinners, and the online gambling had been replaced by honest tiredness and restorative sleep. Harold helped a lot in Richard's adaptation process. As an experienced neighbor, he taught construction techniques, pointed out where to buy cheap materials, and even arranged some extra work for him in the area. "The boy is trying hard," Harold commented to Dorothy Ann. "It's not easy for someone used to an office to accept working hauling stone and cement." The treatment for the addiction was also showing results. Richard was attending online Gamblers Anonymous meetings and had installed apps on his phone to block gambling sites. "It's one day at a time, Mom," he said during a Sunday lunch. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm managing." Dorothy Ann watched her son eating the simple beans she had prepared. It was very different from the fancy restaurants he used to frequent before, but he seemed genuinely satisfied. "Richard, do you miss your old life?" "I miss the conveniences, Mom, not having to worry about every dollar spent. But I don't miss the constant anxiety, the lies, the pressure." It was a mature answer, showing real self-awareness. The legal case was resolved quickly after the presentation of Mrs. Gertrude's diary. Richard withdrew his defense and even had to pay court costs. But money was no longer the main issue for any of them. With the inheritance released, Dorothy Ann and Walter could finally use the resources to improve the property. They renovated the main house, built a new kitchen, and there were still funds left for safe investments that would guarantee a comfortable monthly income. "You know something, Dorothy Ann," said Walter, as they watched the sunset from the newly renovated porch. "I feel richer now living simply here in the mountains than I felt before with that whole big house in the city." "I feel the same way. I think wealth isn't about having many things. It's about having the peace to enjoy what you have." 6 months after Richard's move to the caretaker's house, they received an unexpected visit. It was the grandchildren, Brandon and Emily, who showed up accompanied by Jennifer. The ex-daughter-in-law looked different. Less makeup, simpler clothes, a less arrogant expression. Circumstances had forced a change in her demeanor. "Mother-in-law, I wanted to apologize," she said, visibly embarrassed. "Jennifer, sit. Let's talk." What followed was a difficult but necessary conversation. Jennifer admitted she had pressured Richard to make extreme decisions because she was terrified of losing their standard of living. "I grew up poor and swore I'd never go through that again. When Richard started having financial problems, I panicked. And now, how are you dealing with the situation?" "I'm learning. I went back to work, something I hadn't done in years. The kids are in a public school. We sold the car and bought a used one. It's hard, but it's honest." Dorothy Ann looked at her daughter-in-law with new eyes. The arrogant woman had given way to someone more human, more real. "Jennifer, do you want to try to rebuild your marriage with Richard?" "I do, but I'm afraid. Afraid he'll start gambling again, afraid we'll be in need again, afraid we won't be able to give the children a good life." "A good life isn't just about money," Walter said gently. "A good life is a united family, honest work, peace at home." The grandchildren, who had been quiet during the adults' conversation, finally spoke up. "Grandpa, we miss Dad," said Emily, the youngest. "Can he come back home?" asked Brandon. The situation was delicate. Richard was recovering well, but he still needed time to consolidate the change. A hasty return to the family could trigger a relapse. "Kids, how about you stay here for a few days to talk with your dad?" suggested Dorothy Ann. "He lives right nearby in the little caretaker's house." The idea excited the children, who hadn't seen their father in months. Jennifer hesitated but ended up agreeing. The reunion of Richard with his children was emotional. He had changed a lot physically, thinner, more tanned from working in the sun with calluses on his hands, but his eyes shone in a way the children hadn't seen in a long time. "Dad, you're different," observed Brandon. "How so, son?" "More calm. Before you were always nervous, looking at your phone all the time." The 15-year-old boy's observation was pertinent. Richard really was more present, more attentive to the family. During the 3 days they spent in the mountains, the family went through a careful process of reconnection. Richard showed his children the house he was building, explained the work he was doing, and most importantly, apologized for the problems he had caused. "Kids, Daddy did some very wrong things. I hurt the whole family because of a problem I have with gambling, but I'm getting treatment and trying to become a better person." "Dad, you won't gamble anymore?" asked Emily. "I'll fight every day not to gamble, sweetheart. It's a disease, like alcoholism or drug addiction. It doesn't heal overnight, but it can be controlled." Richard's honesty even impressed Jennifer. It was the first time she had seen him take full responsibility for his problems, without blaming external circumstances. "Richard, if I come back, how will I know you won't bet again?" she asked during a private conversation. "You won't know, Jennifer. I can't give you guarantees. I can only promise I'll do everything in my power to stay in control. And if you relapse? If I relapse, you should leave me immediately. Don't give me second chances if that happens." It was an answer Jennifer didn't expect. The old Richard would have made empty promises and asked for blind trust. This Richard was being brutally honest about his limitations. On the last day of the visit, the whole family gathered for a definitive conversation. Dorothy Ann prepared a special lunch with all the dishes the children liked most. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" she asked Richard and Jennifer. "We've decided to try again," Jennifer replied, "but slowly. For now, I'll keep my job in the city. Richard will continue living here, recovering. On weekends, the children and I will come here." "And if everything goes well?" asked Walter. "If everything goes well, in a year we'll move here permanently. Jennifer can work from home, the children transfer to a local school, and we build a new life." It was a sensible and gradual plan. No hasty decisions or ones based on emotion. "And do you agree to keep living here on the property?" asked Dorothy Ann. "If you'll have us, yes," replied Richard. "The city was always a temptation for me. Here I feel more protected." It was true. The relative isolation of the mountains worked as a natural barrier against the temptations of urban life. After Jennifer and the children left, life in the mountains returned to its quiet routine. Richard dedicated himself to work during the week and was gradually turning the caretaker's house into a cozy home. "Dad, thank you for giving me this chance," he said during one of the Sunday lunches. "Richard, don't thank us yet. You're the one doing the hard work." "Yes, but you could have rejected me for good. After everything I did, it would be understandable." "Son, rejecting you would be rejecting a part of ourselves," said Dorothy Ann. "It doesn't mean we approve of what you did, but you're still our blood." The conversation was interrupted by Michael, who arrived with Susan and the children for Sunday lunch. The family was gradually reuniting, but now on more solid foundations. "How's the house renovation going?" asked Michael to Richard. "Going well. Next week I'll start painting. Harold got a good price on the paint. Need any help? If you can lend a hand over the weekend, I'd appreciate it." It was a simple dialogue, but meaningful. The brothers were rebuilding the relationship that had been damaged by Richard's financial problems. During the afternoon, the children played in the backyard while the adults talked on the porch. It was the kind of family gathering that had been missing for years. "You know we wasted a lot of time fighting, right?" said Richard suddenly. "We wasted time, but we gained wisdom," replied Michael. "Now we know what's really important." "And what is that?" asked Susan. "A united family, honest work, and peace at home," answered Walter, repeating the phrase he had said to Jennifer. "Dad, you're turning into a philosopher," joked Michael. "Old age is good for that too," replied Walter, smiling. In the late afternoon, after everyone had left, Dorothy Ann and Walter were alone on the porch watching the trees sway in the wind. "Walter, do you think we'll manage to have our family back?" I think we already do, Dorothy. Maybe not in the way we expected, but we do. It was true. The family had been rebuilt on different foundations, more mature and realistic. There was no longer the naivety of before, but there were also no more lies and manipulations. 6 months later, the transformation was visible. Richard had finished renovating the caretaker's house and gotten a steady job at a local construction company. Jennifer came every weekend and was gradually adapting to the simpler life. "Mother-in-law, I never imagined I could be happy without malls, fancy restaurants, and a new car," she confessed during a walk around the property. "And now? Now I think I've discovered other sources of happiness. Waking up to birds singing, breathing fresh air, seeing Richard working with pleasure." The change in Jennifer had perhaps been more dramatic than Richard's. The shallow woman had given way to someone more connected to genuine values. The children were also adapting well. Brandon had discovered a passion for nature photography, taking advantage of the mountain landscape. Emily became interested in gardening, helping her grandmother with the vegetable patch. "Grandma, in the city I was just on my phone. Here I've discovered a lot of cool things," she said while planting tomato seedlings. 1 year after arriving in the mountains, the family was completely reorganized. Richard had gotten a promotion at work and was respected in the region for his honesty and dedication. Jennifer had gotten a work-from-home job that paid less than her previous one, but offered the flexibility to live in the countryside. "Dad, Mom, we've decided to move here permanently," announced Richard during a Sunday lunch. "Are you sure?" asked Dorothy Ann. "Absolutely. This place saved us. Why would we want to leave?" The decision marked the official end of the recovery period. The family was united again, but in a more mature and conscious way. Attorney Robert Williamson visited the property to resolve the final legal details of the inheritance. He was impressed by the transformation he found. "When I first met you, you were shattered by family problems. Now I see a happy, united family," he commented. "It was a difficult road, Attorney," said Walter, "but it was worth it." "Your mother would be proud to see what you've built here," added the lawyer. It was true, Mrs. Gertrude had wished for the property to bring peace to Walter and Dorothy Ann, but she probably never imagined it would also be an instrument of recovery for her troubled grandson. During the autumn of that year, they received a special visit. It was Martha, the former employee of Mrs. Gertrude, who had become a friend of the family. "How is life in the mountains?" she asked. "Better than we imagined," replied Dorothy Ann. "Sometimes I think Mrs. Gertrude planned all of this." "Who knows? She was always a very wise woman," said Martha, smiling. "Martha, do you think she would approve of what we did with Richard?" asked Walter. "I think so. Mrs. Gertrude was tough but fair. She wanted people to learn from their mistakes, not be destroyed by them." The answer brought final peace to Walter and Dorothy Ann. They had found the balance between unconditional love and necessary discipline. That year-end, the Mountain House hosted its first Christmas dinner. 3 generations gathered around the large wooden table that Mrs. Gertrude had preserved for decades. Richard insisted on preparing a speech before the dinner. "Family, I want to take this occasion to ask for forgiveness once more, and thank you for your patience with me. 2 years ago, I was a lost man, destroying everything I touched. Today, I am happy in a way I never imagined possible." "Richard, you don't have to keep apologizing forever," said Michael. "What matters is that you learned and changed." "It's true," agreed Dorothy Ann. "Now we are a family again. A different family, but a genuine one." Walter raised a glass of homemade wine that Harold had taught him to make. A toast to family. Not to the perfect family that never existed, but to the real family that learned to forgive and start over. Everyone toasted, including the children with grape juice. It was a moment of genuine gratitude for the second chance life had offered. After dinner, everyone gathered on the porch to look at the stars. The city's light pollution didn't exist in the mountains, allowing a clear view of the night sky. "Grandpa, how many stars are there?" asked Tyler. "Billions, my grandson, each with its own light." "Like people?" "Like people," agreed Walter, smiling. It was a simple but profound observation. Each person had their own light, but sometimes needed to escape the pollution of problems to shine completely. Dorothy Ann watched the gathered family and felt immense gratitude for the journey they had taken. 2 years ago, they were being evicted from their home by their own children. Now, they had not only a home but a family rebuilt on solid foundations. "Walter, do you regret anything we went through?" she asked when they were alone. "I regret the pain we felt, but I don't regret the outcome. Sometimes we need to be broken to be rebuilt better." It was a mature reflection from someone who had lived enough to understand that some suffering is necessary for growth. The following year, the property underwent more improvements. They built a small chapel where Mrs. Gertrude had expressed a desire to have one. They created a play area for the children. They planted a community garden that also served the neighbors. The house had become a gathering point for the local community. Harold often brought friends to meet the city family that found peace in the mountains. "You've become something like celebrities here in the region," he joked during a barbecue. "Why?" "Because you proved it's possible to start over at any age. Many people are inspired by your story." It was true. Several elderly couples had sought out Dorothy Ann and Walter to share similar problems with their children and ask for advice. "The secret is not to be afraid to say no," Dorothy Ann would advise. "Love isn't about giving in to every wish. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite." Richard had also become a kind of example in the region. His transformation from a failed businessman to a respected worker inspired other men facing similar problems. "What helped me most was accepting that I had to start from scratch," he would say to those who asked. "There are no shortcuts to recovery." 2 years after arriving in the mountains, they received an unexpected call. It was a journalist from a regional magazine who had heard about the family's story and wanted to do a feature. "We don't want exposure," said Walter initially. "But Dad," Richard intervened, "maybe our story could help other families going through the same problem." After much discussion, they decided to accept, but with conditions. No sensationalism, focus on the positive message of overcoming and reconciliation, and preservation of the children's privacy. The article, titled "The Family That Found Salvation in the Mountains," was published 3 months later and had a great impact. Many people contacted them, sharing similar experiences and asking for advice. "I never imagined our pain could turn into hope for other people," commented Dorothy Ann after reading some of the letters they received. "Maybe that was the purpose of it all," suggested Richard, "to learn in order to teach." The idea made sense. All the suffering they had gone through had resulted in wisdom they could now share with others. 3 years after the story began, the transformation was complete. The mountain house had become a prosperous and happy home. Richard was fully recovered from his addiction, with 3 years without betting a penny. Jennifer had found fulfillment in a simpler life connected with nature. The children grew up healthy and happy, with solid values and appreciation for genuine things. Brandon had decided to study architecture, inspired by the historical buildings in the region. Emily wanted to be a veterinarian to care for the farm animals. Michael and Susan had bought a neighboring plot of land and built a weekend house, creating a true family community in the mountains. "Dad, sometimes I think how different our life would be if Grandma Gertrude hadn't left that letter," commented Richard during a walk around the property. "I think we would have found another way," replied Walter. "When two people truly love each other and have solid values, they always find a way to overcome difficulties. And when a family wants to rebuild itself, that too, true love always finds a way." It was a conviction based on lived experience. They had proven that even in the most difficult situations, family love can prevail. On the 4th anniversary of their arrival in the mountains, they organized a big party to celebrate. They invited all the neighbors, Martha, attorney Robert Williamson, and even some of the couples who had sought advice over the years. "This party is to thank everyone who was part of our journey," said Dorothy Ann during her speech. "Alone we never would have managed to rebuild our family. And to show that it's worth fighting for the values we believe in," added Walter. The party lasted late into the night with music, dancing, and many stories shared. It was a celebration not only of the rebuilt family, but of the community that had formed around them. When everyone had left and the house fell silent again, Dorothy Ann and Walter sat on the porch for their nightly ritual of contemplation. "Walter, if someone had told us 5 years ago that we would be kicked out of our home by our children and end up happier than before. Would we have believed it? Never, he replied, laughing. But maybe that's what makes life interesting. You never know what surprises it's preparing. Some good, some bad. All necessary in some way. It was a wisdom earned through experience. They had learned that happiness doesn't come from the absence of problems, but from the ability to overcome them while keeping values intact. In their 5th year in the mountains, they received an unexpected proposal. A group of investors wanted to buy the property to turn it into a luxury inn, offering a price 10 times higher than the market value. "That's a lot of money," said Richard when he learned of the offer. "It is," agreed Walter. "But we don't need a lot of money. We need a home." "Dad, are you sure? With that money you could buy any place in the United States." "Richard, why would we want any place in the United States if we already have the perfect place for us here?" asked Dorothy Ann. The answer perfectly summarized the transformation they had undergone. 5 years ago, they might have accepted the offer without hesitation. Now they understood that the value of a place is not measured in money but in memories and emotional connections. "Besides," added Walter, "this house was given to us by my mother to be our refuge. Selling it would disrespect her intention." The decision to refuse the offer was unanimous. No family member showed regret or questioned the choice. The investors tried to increase the offer twice, but the answer was always the same. The house was not for sale at any price. "Some things in life are priceless," explained Dorothy Ann to the real estate agent handling the negotiation. "You don't understand. This is a unique opportunity to become very rich. Young man, I am already rich. I have a united family, health, a beautiful place to live, and peace in my heart. What more could I want?" The agent left without understanding, but several people in the community commented on the wisdom of Dorothy Ann's answer. In the 6th year, they began receiving visits from psychology and social work students who came to study the family dynamic they had built. The regional university had developed a research project on resilient families, and they were one of the cases studied. "It's strange to be a study subject," Richard commented to the professor in charge of the research. "Why do you think your family managed to rebuild itself when so many others couldn't?" asked the researcher. "I think it's because we never lost hope in each other," replied Dorothy Ann, after thinking for a moment. "Even when I was very angry with Richard, I always knew there was a good person inside him. And because they didn't abandon me when I deserved to be abandoned," added Richard. "But they also set clear boundaries," observed Jennifer. "It wasn't unconditional forgiveness. It was forgiveness with responsibility." The study resulted in an academic paper that was published in a specialized journal, bringing the family's story into the scientific community as an example of overcoming and reconciliation. In the 7th year in the mountains, Dorothy Ann and Walter decided to write a book telling their experience, not with commercial intent, but as a legacy for their grandchildren and for other families who might benefit from their experience. "What will we call the book?" asked Richard, who had volunteered to help with the typing. "The House of the Second Chance," suggested Dorothy Ann. Or, "From Despair to Hope," proposed Walter. After much discussion, they chose Mountain of Reconciliation, a true story of a family rebuilt. The writing process was therapeutic for the whole family. Each contributed their memories and perspectives, creating a multifaceted portrait of the journey they had traveled together. "It's impressive how each of us remembers the same events differently," observed Michael upon reading the first draft. "But we all arrived at the same conclusions about what we learned," noted Susan. The book took 2 years to complete and was published by a regional publisher specializing in family memoirs. It didn't become a bestseller, but it deeply touched those who read it. In the 9th year in the mountains, they faced the first major test of the rebuilt family. Walter was diagnosed with a heart condition requiring complex surgery. "Dad, we'll take you to the best hospital in New York," Richard said immediately. "I don't want to go to New York." "I want to get treatment close by," replied Walter. "Dad, be reasonable. Your life is at risk." "My son, my entire life is here. If it's my time to go, I want to go at home." It was a difficult decision, but Dorothy Ann supported her husband. They had learned that quality of life was more important than quantity. They found an excellent cardiologist in Aspen who agreed to perform the surgery at the regional hospital. The operation was a success, but the recovery period was long and demanding. For 3 months, the whole family took turns caring for Walter. Richard took a leave from work. Jennifer cancelled commitments in the city. Michael rearranged his school schedule. "That's what family is," said Walter during his recovery. "When one needs help, everyone pitches in." The experience strengthened their family bonds even further. They had faced together not only emotional problems, but also a health crisis. In their 10th year in the mountains, they decided to organize an annual gathering for families who had gone through similar experiences. The event, named the Resilient Families Gathering, took place on their property and brought together more than 50 people. "You've turned your personal pain into a healing force for others," commented one of the participants. "That was always the goal, even without knowing it," replied Dorothy Ann. The gathering became an annual event, growing with each edition. Families came from various states to share experiences and seek hope. Richard had become an informal speaker on addiction recovery, always emphasizing that there are no magic solutions, only daily work and family support. "Recovery is not a destination, it's a journey," he would say in his presentations. "Every day I wake up and choose not to gamble. Some days the choice is easy, others it's hard, but it's always a choice." In the 11th year, they were visited by an independent filmmaker who wanted to make a documentary about the family. After much discussion, they agreed, but on the condition that part of the proceeds would go to projects helping families in crisis. The documentary, titled Children of the Heart, was shown at regional festivals and won awards for Best American Documentary at 2 independent showcases. "I never imagined our story would become a movie," joked Walter during the premiere. "Me neither," replied Dorothy Ann. "But if it helps even one family, it was worth it." The film indeed helped many families. They received hundreds of letters from people who were inspired by the story and managed to rebuild their family relationships. In the 12th year in the mountains, the time came for a new test. Brandon, the eldest grandson, had finished college and received a job offer from a large company in New York. "Grandpa, I don't know if I should accept the job," he confessed to Walter. "Why not?" "Because I'm afraid of becoming like what Dad was before, focused only on money, forgetting about family." The grandson's concern showed how the family's lessons had been internalized by the new generations. "Brandon, you can work anywhere and keep your values," said Walter. "Your father's problem wasn't where he worked, but how he chose to live." "But what if I lose my way?" "Then you come back home and start over, like your father did, like we all do when necessary." Brandon accepted the job, but with clear conditions for himself: to call the family every week, visit the mountains at least once a month, and never let work become more important than people. "That's how values are passed on," observed Dorothy Ann, watching her grandson leave for his new life. "Not through sermons, but through examples." In the 13th year, Emily finished high school and decided to study veterinary medicine at a nearby university so she could continue living in the region. "Grandma, I can't imagine my life away from here," she said. "This mountain is my place in the world." It was comforting to see one of the granddaughters fully embracing the lifestyle they had built. That same year, Jennifer became pregnant again at 42. The pregnancy was unexpected, but received with joy by the whole family. "Another member for our tribe," Richard joked when they shared the news. The baby, who would be baptized Walter in honor of his grandfather, represented a new beginning for the family. A child who would grow up knowing only the healthy, united version of the family without the traumas of the past. "This baby will grow up thinking family was always like this," commented Michael. "And he's right," replied Dorothy Ann. "The past served to teach us. The future is for applying what we've learned." In their 14th year on the mountain, they faced the departure of Harold, the neighbor who had become a brother. He passed away peacefully at 85, surrounded by family and the friends he considered his adopted family. "Harold taught us that neighbors can become family," said Walter during the funeral. Harold's property was inherited by nephews who lived in another state. They decided to sell it, which could bring new neighbors to the area. The family decided to buy the neighboring property to preserve the tranquility of the area and honor Harold's memory. They turned his house into a community library and space for cultural activities. Harold would have loved knowing his house became a place for gathering and learning, said Dorothy Ann at the library's inauguration. In the 15th year, little Walter was 2 years old and filled the house with joy and energy. He was a communicative and happy child, already showing the loving personality that characterized the family. "Grandpa Tony, tell a story," he would ask every day before bed. Walter had become a storyteller, creating fables that conveyed important values to his great-grandson and the other children in the family. "Once upon a time, there was a family that lived on a very high mountain," he would begin, and everyone knew it was his own story being told in a playful way. The 16th year brought a surprise. Brandon, who had done well at the company in New York, decided to open a branch of the company in the mountain region so he could live closer to the family. "Grandpa, I've discovered that professional success without family is worth nothing," he explained to Walter. "And how did your bosses react to your proposal?" "They were interested. The region is growing, it has potential, and I proved I can work well anywhere." Brandon's decision marked the closing of a cycle. The third generation was consciously choosing to preserve the family values won with so much effort. In the 17th year, Dorothy Ann was diagnosed with arthritis in her knees, but she refused to let it limit her life. With physical therapy and adaptations to the house, she remained active and involved in all family activities. "Age brings limitations, but it doesn't have to bring sadness," she philosophized to anyone who expressed concern. Walter, then 89, remained lucid and active, tending the garden and participating in all the family's important decisions. "You two are examples of healthy aging," commented the family doctor during a routine checkup. "The secret is having purpose," replied Walter. "As long as we feel we are useful to someone, we remain truly alive." In the 18th year on the mountain, the family was completely established and prosperous. The property had become a complex of houses where 3 generations lived, each with their independence, but all connected by deep bonds. Richard was respected in the region as an upstanding businessman and had become an informal counselor for other men facing problems with addiction. Jennifer had found total fulfillment in rural life and often received visits from city friends who envied her peace and happiness. Michael had become the principal of the school where he worked and implemented several educational projects inspired by family values. The children grew up healthy, did well in their studies, and displayed emotional maturity above the average for their generation. "We did it," said Dorothy Ann to Walter on a starry night. "We rebuilt our family better than it was before." "We did, but not alone," he replied. "We had help from many people along the way." "And especially from each other," she added. It was the perfect summary of their journey. Unconditional love, combined with clear boundaries, had allowed them to overcome difficulties and build something solid and lasting. In the 19th year, they received an honor from the St. Benedict Springs City Hall as Family of the Year, recognizing their contribution to the community and their example of overcoming adversity. "You have shown that it is possible to turn pain into hope," said the mayor during the ceremony. The tribute was moving, but what touched them most was seeing that they had managed to inspire other people not to give up on their families. In the 20th year in the mountains, they organized a big party to celebrate 2 decades of life on the property. They invited all the people who had been part of their journey, neighbors, doctors, lawyers, friends, and of course the families they had met through the annual gatherings. 20 years ago, we arrived here shattered, not knowing what the future held for us, said Dorothy Ann during the speech. Today we see our family multiplied, prosperous, and united. And we learned that no matter how difficult the situation, there is always a way out when you have love, determination, and the right people by your side, Walter added. Richard also insisted on speaking. 20 years ago, I was a lost man who almost destroyed everything I loved. Today, I am a happy man who learned that true wealth is not in what you have, but in what you build with love. The party lasted all day and ended with fireworks lighting up the mountain. It was a celebration not only of the family, but of all the values they had learned to cherish: honesty, hard work, forgiveness, perseverance, and above all, unconditional love. When everyone had left and the house returned to silence, Dorothy Ann and Walter sat on the porch for their nightly ritual of contemplation, now joined by their great-grandson Walter, who slept in his great-grandfather's lap. "Walter, if we could go back in time, would you change anything?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "I would change the pain we felt, but I wouldn't change the outcome. We are a better family today than we were 20 years ago." "That's true. We matured, we learned to value what really matters. And we discovered that true love isn't just accepting everything, but also knowing when to say no." It was the perfect summary of everything they had learned during the journey. Unconditional love didn't mean unlimited permissiveness. It meant being present, supporting when necessary, correcting when needed, and forgiving whenever possible. "Do you think we managed to leave a good legacy for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren?" asked Dorothy Ann. "I think so. We showed them that family is a treasure worth any effort to preserve, and that it's never too late to start over, and that true success in life isn't measured in money, but in healthy relationships and meaningful purpose." Little Walter stirred in his great-grandfather's lap, making him smile. "This little one will grow up in a solid family with well-defined values," he said, stroking the baby's curls. "He will grow up knowing he is loved unconditionally, but also that his actions have consequences. He will grow up knowing that family is forever, but that relationships need to be cared for and respected." When they finally got up to go to sleep, Dorothy Ann took one last look at the mountain landscape. The full moon illuminated the trees and the stone house that had become their permanent home. "Thank you, Mrs. Gertrude," she whispered to the wind. "You gave us much more than a house. You gave us a second chance." Walter heard her and smiled. "I think she knows, and I think she's proud of what we've built here." They went inside the house arm in arm, carrying their great-grandson who slept peacefully. They were 3 generations united under one roof, protected by the same love, guided by the same values. The mountain house had fulfilled its mission. It was more than a physical refuge. It had become a sanctuary where a shattered family could heal, rebuild, and flourish again. And so, after 20 years of challenges, tears, forgiveness, and hard work, the family that was once expelled from their home by their own children had found not just a new home, but a new way to love, to live together, and to be happy. The mountain kept all the secrets, all the tears, and all the joys of that extraordinary journey, and it would continue to keep them for many future generations, because some stories are too big to be forgotten. The next morning, as always, Dorothy Ann woke up early to prepare coffee. Walter got up soon after to tend to the garden. Richard left for work with a smile on his face. Jennifer began her home office shift humming. The children ran through the house bringing life and joy. It was another normal day in the extraordinary life they had built together, a life based on simple yet solid values, a life that proved that, with love, determination, and wisdom, any family can overcome any adversity. And so, the story of the family that was expelled from home and found a mansion hidden in the mountains came to an end not with grand dramatic gestures, but with the quiet beauty of everyday life lived with purpose and love. Because true happiness is not in the extraordinary moments, but in the ability to find meaning and joy in the ordinary moments shared with the people we love. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this story of overcoming and family love? Do you believe the family made the right decisions by setting clear boundaries but never giving up on love? Which part of this family's journey touched you the most? Leave your opinions in the comments, as we love to read what you think. Don't forget to leave a like if the story moved you and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that go straight to the heart.